Good evening and welcome to the Journal. I'm Steve Kendall. A familiar face is joining the 2026 U.S. Senate race in Ohio, and the Ohio governor is working with the federal government to deploy troops in D.C. And also, current U.S. Senator Bernie Moreno appears at the City Club of Cleveland to mixed reviews and mixed comments. We're joined for this edition of Journal by the host of the State of Ohio, Karen Kasler, and Dr. Nicole Kalaf-Hughes from Bowling Green State University's Department of Political Science. Welcome both of you to Journal. Karen, as I mentioned in the just now in the intro, Sherrod Brown decided he's going to run against John Husted, who was appointed to fill the Senate seat vacated by J.D. Vance. So, Karen, talk about the interview you folks had with Sherrod Brown and what his plan is as he basically makes his comeback to the U.S. Senate.
My State House News Bureau colleague Jo Ingles talked to him. She sat down with him for about a 15-minute interview, and I think his entrance in the race is not a surprise. He is by far the best known Democratic figure in Ohio politics. Sadly, that's not saying a lot because there's only one elected statewide Democrat in Ohio right now, since Sherrod Brown and two other Supreme Court justices were defeated in 2024. So Brown, I think the question was whether he was going to run for governor or U.S. Senate. There were some people who wanted to see him run for governor, including some labor leaders, but he eventually decided to run for Senate. I think the pressure from Senate Minority Leader Chuck Schumer was part of that because there were some pictures put out on social media of Schumer and Brown out on the town here in Columbus in June and July. So I think that kind of gave us a hint of what was going to be happening here.
And what were the alternatives? Who else had expressed interest in the race or had talked about it? Because obviously Sherrod Brown, as you mentioned, is the biggest name in Democratic politics in Ohio right now. Who else would have or still could decide that they might want to challenge him in the primary?
Well, there's a guy from Northeast Ohio, a wealthy man named Fred Odie, who has said that he will challenge him in a primary, but we haven't seen any paperwork filed from him. And of course, there's Tim Ryan, the former congressman, who ran against J.D. Vance in 2022 and lost that race. Ryan has said in the wake of Sherrod Brown's announcement that his phone has been blowing up with people wondering if he's going to run for governor. Of course, there's already a Democrat in the race for governor, and that's Dr. Amy Acton, the former director of the Ohio Department of Health. But Tim Ryan has said he's interested and then decided not to run for things before. So we're still wondering if we're going to actually hear something from him or not. But it really looks like Sherrod Brown is going to be the nominee, certainly, and he's going to be the one that the National Democratic Party and donors are going to be pouring money into. In fact, he claims that he raised $3.6 million just in the first day that he was out officially as a candidate. So he has a lot of potential money behind him, but that may or may not win the race. I mean, Ohio has gone for President Trump 3 times now, and including the last time when he ran in 2024, he lost by less than 4 points, but Trump won Ohio by a little over 11 points. So he did better than a lot of Democrats in 2024, but still lost.
Yeah, and Nicole, when we look at the race, obviously Sherrod Brown has name recognition, but he's going to fight an uphill battle in Ohio, which is a 54-46 or 55-45 Republican state, depending on how you view the presidential races. So even though he's been a senator, he was defeated the last time, it's going to be difficult for him in the state of Ohio.
It is, and I think it's going to be really interesting. Historically, he's done well, and the one thing that we kind of have to keep in mind, though, obviously the past doesn't dictate the future, is that whenever you have someone who has been kind of appointed to a Senate seat in Ohio in recent history and then run for that seat 2 years later when the election comes up, or less than 2 years, depending on when the appointment happens, they actually haven't won. The person challenging them has won. Now, politics are very different now. Things may have changed, but we do see that in recent history, the challenger has done better. So I think that is something just to kind of keep in mind. Another thing to keep in mind is that a lot of how he does, or how Sherrod Brown does in this race, is going to be affected by what the kind of the national political conversation is. And while Ohio has gone for Trump, there has been it was a much narrower victory for the Senate race last time than we saw in the presidential race. And so I think we know that there are people who do support President Trump or did in the 2024 election, but also voted for Sherrod Brown. And so we're going to have to see kind of how that shakes out a little bit this time. And a lot of it, I mean, it's not that far away, but it's still far enough away where stuff is going to happen and there's going to be some changes.
Yeah, and Karen, I noticed when the interview that you folks did with Sherrod Brown, he focused a lot, which has been his message in the last campaign, about he's for the workers, and he positions and says, no one else is for the workers like I am, and he's talking union, non-union, no matter what you do if you're a worker, that's his message. Is he trying, that was not as successful the last time when he ran against Marino. Is there a reason to think it will be more successful this time than it was a couple of years ago?
I'm not sure about that. I mean, he did start this Dignity of Work Institute back in March to kind of continue on with that message. And that kind of gave us a clue, too, because he was talking about workers on a national level, that he was really very seriously thinking about running for the U.S. Senate rather than running for governor. But I think really a lot of this is going to depend on what Nicole said about the climate in general and what the climate is like in midterms next year. I mean, midterm elections typically don't go well for the party in power, but all bets are off in the time of Trump here. So that's something to think about. But also, I think one of the reasons that Sherrod Brown eventually did make the full-on decision to run for Senate is the idea that he was going to get some funding from the national level. He really didn't get a whole lot of funding. He was pretty vocal about how he didn't get what he had hoped for from national Democrats when he ran against Bernie Moreno and lost. So I think the idea that maybe he's going to be getting some support from national Democrats may have pushed him over the edge into the Senate race rather than to the governor's race or staying home, which never really seemed that much like an option, but of course it could have been.
Yeah, okay, well, we come back because you mentioned the fact that Sherrod Brown was a little concerned about not getting support, and that's a theme that's kind of run for Senate Democrat candidates in Ohio, because Tim Ryan wasn't thrilled with the level of support he got nationally, too. So we can talk a little about that when we come back. Back in just a moment with Karen Kasler and Dr. Nicole Kalaf-Hughes here on The Journal. Thank you for staying with us on The Journal. Our guests are Dr. Kalaf-Hughes from Bowling Green State University and Karen Kasler from the state of Ohio, which you can see every Sunday at noon here on WBGU-PBS. Karen, that last segment we talked about the fact, and you mentioned that Sherrod Brown wasn't all that thrilled the last time about the support he got financially and otherwise from the National Democratic Party. Tim Ryan, when he ran, was very upset about the fact that he felt he had a winnable election in Ohio, but the National Party had moved on and said, no, we're not going to win in Ohio. Thanks, Tim. See you later. So this seems to be a theme. As the Democratic Party, the National Party said, we don't think we can win in Ohio no matter who runs as a Senate candidate, because if they're not going to put money behind Sherrod Brown, who would they put it behind any time in the future, if another 4 years from now?
Well, and that's the question. I mean, resources are finite, and the party that's not in power, I mean, Republicans are in power in the U.S. House, in the U.S. Senate, and in the White House. And so there's a lot of money that has been raised alongside that. And so Democrats have had to make choices on what states they were going to spend money on, places that they felt were possibilities. And I think once Trump endorsed Vance and the way that things appeared to be turning in 2022, that explains some of that. I mean, Ryan did better than other Democrats, but he still was not really close to J.D. Vance in terms of the final outcome there. And Sherrod Brown kind of had a similar situation where it really looked like Trump was going to do well in Ohio and other Republicans were also going to do well in Ohio. So that explains that. But when you start talking about the midterm elections here and where things might end up, especially since we've seen some pushback on the economy, on the Epstein files, on some of these other things that Democrats have been really pushing hard, who knows what's going to happen? It's a long time. I mean, you have to remind people that this is next year's election.
Yeah, not 25, not this November, a year from November, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
So it's just, it's a long time. A lot of things can happen, but that doesn't necessarily mean things will happen.
Yeah, and Nicole, it's interesting because, we're talking as if this election's going to happen right now, and because everybody's on top of this. are we getting to the point now where elections that are, in this case, more than a year away, our focus is going to be almost like a presidential election that starts the day after one of them is done in November? We start talking about the next one, because we're talking about something that's more than a year away, and yet all the focus is on Sherrod Brown and John Husted in 26. And just like some of the other things that are not going to happen, the governor's race now, not for another year, and yet we're acting like it's going to happen this November rather than November 26. Is that the way politics is going to go from now on? That you've won election, you start thinking about, okay, what's going to happen in the next election, literally the day afterwards?
Oh, I mean, in short, yes. And it's kind of exhausting. I think everyone's getting a little bit exhausted by it. But part of the reason for that just has to do with the structure of our election. So we're talking about the Senate race. And this is kind of an off-cycle Senate race because of the appointment, because of the fact that Vance vacated that seat to become vice president. So it's a little bit rare there. But members of the House, right, they're up for election every 2 years all the time. And so they're kind of known for this constant campaigning.
Right.
In the Senate, we don't usually see that. They serve 6-year terms normally. So this is a little bit off-cycle. But I think it's just more kind of a broad comment on what our politics looks like now. We know that the party out of power usually does better in the midterms. So Democrats are probably going to see this as an opportunity, or at least their best opportunity, because usually, regardless of who is in power, to get there, they've made a lot of promises that are just really hard to keep. And so we tend as voters to be like, well, we voted them in this presidential election year. They haven't done every single thing they said they were going to. So 2 years later, we put the other party back into Congress. And so that tends to be how it's gone. And so we're going to see a little bit of that. But I think a lot of this is just kind of the state of politics, this constant upheaval, this constant campaigning. And I think it does get to the point where voters get a little bit exhausted by it and also a little bit confused. So we're going to be having these same conversations for the next year and a couple months as the campaign gets closer. And with the two people who are running in this Senate race, they are not, and maybe more people will come in, like Karen said, but they're not unknown quantities. We have a pretty long history on both candidates, or both major candidates so far. So it's not like a lot of unknown things are going to come out, or there's going to be a lot of a learning curve. It's just going to be kind of drag out campaigning, I think, for the next year plus until we get to the election.
Yeah, and Karen,
I'd say the one wild card here is redistricting, because Ohio, Texas, California, some other states are doing redistricting kind of in the middle of the cycle here. And obviously there's a lot of pressure from the White House and from Republicans at the national level to find more Republican seats. That's put pressure on Democrats to find more Democratic seats. And so we have not yet seen what Ohio's redistricted map will look like, the redrawn map. Right now it's 10 Republicans, 5 Democrats. I don't necessarily think that was the intended way that the map was drawn when it was drawn. I think it was drawn to be a little bit more favorable to Republicans, but that's not what happened. But now there's some pressure on Republicans in Ohio to draw that map to make it 12 Republicans and 3 Democrats, or even 13 Republicans and 2 Democrats. So even though the midterms, like Nicole just said, tend to be more in favor of the party that's not in power, with these kind of things going on, more seats for Republicans in Texas, more seats for Democrats in California, it's kind of like all bets are off here. Yeah,
well, and it's interesting because we've been talking about redistricting, well, when Ohio was doing it officially the last time and didn't quite get it completely right. That's why we're back here again. But it seems almost as if now you can redistrict whenever you want to, it seems like, and that's something new. And the other thing, and Nicole, there seems to be no shame in saying, yes, we're going to gerrymander this time when we redistrict, almost as if, before we pretended we weren't doing it. Now we're just going to tell you, we are going to gerrymander when we redistrict, and isn't this going to be fun? Before it was almost you didn't want to make a big deal about saying, yes, we're going to draw these unfairly. Now we're saying, yes, we're going to draw them to benefit us, and we're going to have fun doing it. So it's different than it used to be, like a lot of things in politics now. Yeah. It
is really different. There's a couple things that are really different. The mid-cycle redistricting, so Ohio was always going to have to do it because we didn't get the supermajority needed as specified by our last constitutional amendments about redistricting. our districts were only going to last for 4 years. So I'm kind of taking us out of it a little bit for right now. But this call from the executive branch to states saying you need to redraw your lines mid-cycle, and you need to pick up more Republican seats is pretty unusual. States have gerrymandered forever, right? The term gerrymandering comes from a Revolutionary War statesman and governor of Massachusetts, Elbridge Gerry, from the 1700s, because this idea that he drew districts that looked like a salamander. And so, we've had this has been going on since day one, but the actual overt call to do it specifically for a partisan gain, to keep one specific party in power, and not kind of pretending that that's just like surprise, an unintended consequence. That's pretty unusual. Yeah. And then also having these mid-cycle redistricting where it's not actually required. And so the Constitution requires drawing these lines every 10 years after the U.S. Census is conducted, so we can see where people are. And then we can draw districts accordingly. Nothing has changed in that regard. All that has changed is the call for more Republican districts, and then states kind of responding to that. And so there's a ton of implications from how we draw these lines, but that's kind of a really big change that we just haven't seen before. Yeah.
Well, we come back, we can talk a little bit more about this, because obviously we're going to hear more about it in the news. Ohio's in the process of starting which of course was somewhat constitutionally required, so we're an outlier in that we're just not doing it because we can. We're required to because of what we didn't do the last time. So back in just a moment with Karen Kasler and Dr. Nicole Kalaf-Hughes here on The Journal. You're with us on The Journal. Our guests are Karen Kasler, host of the State of Ohio, and Dr. Nicole Kalaf-Hughes from Bowling Green State University. Karen, we were talking about redistricting, which we talk about pretty much all the time because it's Ohio's favorite topic other than algae and Lake Erie.
Funding, don't forget that.
Yeah. Now, Governor DeWine, when this, of course, last time we cycled through this, it didn't come out the way, it didn't meet all the constitutional requirements, so we're back again. Between then and now, he discussed different ideas and plans that he thought might be a better fit for Ohio. Has any of that gotten any traction with anybody in the state regarding those who are going to be dealing with redistricting or not?
Well, he had said before last fall's vote on a redistricting panel that if indeed voters did reject that he would work with state lawmakers to come up with kind of an alternative process similar to what's done in Iowa, where there's a nonpartisan legislative services agency that does the lines there. And we haven't heard anything about that. My colleague Sarah Donaldson asked him in June what was going on with that, and he said that he still believes that would be a better choice than what Ohio's been doing now. But he mentioned that lawmakers have not hinted at any ways and reforms, changes to the process. So it looks like they're going to go ahead potentially and do it the way that they did it last time around. But of course, the question is then how many Republican districts, how many Democratic districts? And it's important to note that this is only congressional redistricting that we'll be doing this time, not redistricting for the Ohio House and the Ohio Senate, just for the 15 congressional districts.
Yeah, well, it's all we can handle right now anyhow. It's just the congressional level. Nicole, when we talk about, and you mentioned this is historically what we've kind of done, but now we're much more out front with just saying, yes, gerrymandering is what we do and we do it well, no matter what state we're talking about. Before we used to, I know we joked about this, we talked about it before, that it kind of made Ohio look like we weren't maybe on top of our game with regard to the way we looked at redistricting, but in a way, we're kind of the norm now versus the outlier that we thought we were a year or so ago.
Yeah, there's a couple states that don't as much, right? They have these nonpartisan commissions, or they have citizen-driven commissions that are not essentially legislators picking their own districts. But now, because we're starting to see more and more of this mid-cycle redistricting and a little bit of a tit-for-tat approach in doing so, everyone is joining us and actually getting farther, into the gerrymandered territory than we are. And once the executive branch asked for 5 more Republican districts in Texas, right, California responded and said, well, if you're going to do that, we're going to try to pass a one-time exemption so we can create 5 more Democratic districts. And then Missouri's in there. They're like, well, we think we can find 1 more Republican seat here. And then so you have other states essentially saying, we're going to redraw the lines to maximize certain party vote share, primarily Republican Party vote share, to prevent Democrats from having a voice. And that has become a very public strategy instead of what is talked about behind closed doors with, we're going to draw these lines and we're going to get an advantage, to we're just going to tell you what we're going to do. And it's going to prevent certain voters from having a voice in their congressional elections. Yeah. The other thing that we don't often think of with this is that you do have a lot of Republicans towing the party line, because that's what's going to keep them in office. But not everyone is super pumped, because when you start redrawing the lines, you're also redrawing their lines. And so what's nice about like a 10-year, a decade-long cycle is you do develop relationships with your constituents. And while you run for re-election, you're still able to provide that important casework for them, whether it's help with Social Security or VA benefits, tickets to the Capitol, right? Those kind of nonpartisan things that members of Congress do that get them back into office, that people like, regardless of what party you tend to represent. And so as we redraw the lines, whether we're looking to benefit one party or the other, people who are currently in office are going to see their districts change. They're going to lose their constituents, but they also may end up completely out of office or competing with a co-partisan for that district. It may mean that they have to move, or they're not living in their district anymore. So we start seeing these changes that happen so often that you lose those constituent connections that are important for re-election. And political scientists always say that members of Congress are single-minded seekers of re-election, which is true. And it becomes really hard if all of a sudden, on the whims of the president, your district is changed, you no longer live in your district, and now you're in a primary election with a co-partisan after you've had to move across, your district lines. And so this stuff makes politics really complicated, both for the elected official and for the voter, who are like, what district am I in? Who do I contact about my, veterans benefits? It's not the same person it was. And that's only looking at the people who are kind of in the party. Right. For the people whose votes are being minimized, they're getting a whole other raw end of the deal. But we tend to talk about them. But this affects everyone. And so it's not something that you should be super pumped about if you're like diehard Republican, relative to diehard Democrat. This kind of constant shifting is going to affect everyone.
Yeah, and Karen, Bernie Moreno, a current U.S. Senator, was at the City Club of Cleveland, and the question of redistricting kind of came up because he has sort of talked about, as you mentioned earlier, he would like to see Ohio have 13 Republican congressional seats and 2 Democrats versus the 10-5 it is now. So he's been very upfront about, as a U.S. Senator, saying, yes, let's redraw the districts to benefit the Republican Party, and that's just how I think it should be. So talk about his response, because he had kind of a contentious discussion with folks at the City Club of Cleveland. Not everybody was a big supporter, I guess you could say, when it was all over.
Well, I think a lot of the City Club back and forth came about because of some other things. There were some people who in Northeast Ohio who were very frustrated with Senator Moreno, that he hasn't held any town halls, he hasn't been available to them to talk about issues that they care about. And so that's where some of the pushback came about. I mean, Henry Gomez, who's an NBC News reporter from the Youngstown area, was the one questioning him. And the City Club always has an audience segment where the audience gets to ask the guest questions as well. And so there were some really good questions about intel, about some other things that have been going on. But yeah, there was some frustration on the part of people who really view Bernie Moreno as being incredibly partisan, because he did say that indeed he thought that 12 Republicans and 3 Democrats in Ohio's congressional delegation would be what Ohio should go for in redistricting. So there's a little bit of frustration, not only at President Trump, but also at Bernie Moreno in particular.
Yeah, and I know toward the end, because I watched your presentation on the state of Ohio, and part of that was too at the end, the gentleman who was the president, whatever, I forget his exact title, but he came out and said, we've got to be a little more, we tried to preface this and say, let's all get along here for this, let's have a good discussion. It didn't go as well, and he kind of chastised the audience in a very diplomatic way. But then afterwards, the Republican Party said, we're going to encourage our folks not to do anything with the City Club of Cleveland because we don't like the environment, which has been sort of par for the course for a lot of elected officials. Say, I'm not going to go out in public unless I can control the narrative, which is not new, but now that's become very blatant to say just, hey, if I think I'm going to get tough questions, I'm not going there. See you later.
And I didn't mean to correct you there. It's board president the board president of the City Club, Mark Ross, had said, hey, we want respectful, thoughtful questions. He said it before the event, anticipating issues. There had been a whole bunch of protesters outside the City Club who had clearly been waiting for the opportunity to put their signs up for Senator Marino if he had seen them. But then also at the end, he specifically said he had really hoped that there would be a little bit more of that. And like you said, the Republican Party chair, Alex Triantafilou, said he, as the party chair, will urge candidates to avoid future events at the City Club of Cleveland. It is not what it purports to be, he writes on X. And until they foster civil adult conversation, Republicans should decline participation to avoid this spectacle. Now, I'm really disappointed in this because I mean, the frustration on the part of a lot of these people comes from the lack of access.
Right.
But, you know, it is frustrating for a guest to show up and feel like they're getting yelled at from members of the audience when there are rules that have been established. So it's a tough situation. But what I really don't want to see is less access to candidates.
Right.
We're already losing access to candidates through debates. Fewer candidates are doing debates now, and to not have even these forums here is really problematic for democracy, because you want to see these people standing in front of a crowd, taking questions, thinking on their feet, and not just doing ads and talking points and that sort of thing.
Yeah, and talking about access, we're going to have to leave it there. Our access is being closed down by time. Karen Kasler, thank you so much. Nicole Kalaf-Hughes, thank you so much. We'll have you back again because obviously we're going to be talking about this for the next, until November of 26 at the very least. We've got some time yet, so we'll be back in a few weeks to talk more about this and see what's happened. You can check us out at WBGU.org. You can watch us every Thursday night at 8 p.m. on WBGU PBS. We'll see you again next time. Good night and good luck.